So, paper ballots we know have already killed 1 million people. So I think that as long as mobile voting doesn't do that, we're ahead of the game. Sports betting on your phone will now be approved. Cannabis legalization will be approved. Some places are legalizing psychedelic drugs. The more that government can provide services digitally, the less government you need.
Hi everyone, today here with us is Bradley Tusk, American businessman, venture capitalist, philanthropist, writer, as well as former deputy governor of Illinois and first political advisor for Uber. Bradley is also leading the effort to bring mobile voting in the United States.
So right now we have a system that if you were trying to come up with a way to convince people not to vote, that's how you would run an election. So turnout in most US elections is abysmally low. So the primary in the US is the election that matters most of the time, not the general election. So that means that turnout in the election that matters is usually 10 to 15%. So who are those 10 to 15%? Either the people on the furthest right, the furthest left, or it's special interests with a lot of money that can move votes inside of a primary. So as a result, if you are a politician and your main goal is to stay in office and to keep feeling like you're somebody important, then the main thing you have to do is not upset those 10 to 15% of people who actually show up and vote in your primary. And because they are the most ideological, they don't want you to get things done. They only want their view to happen. And if it can't happen, they want nothing at all. So the idea of compromise on immigrations or guns or healthcare or climate change or education or all these different crises that are facing this country right now are impossible to achieve because all of the political incentives to politicians is to fight with each other. What would change that would be if turnout were, instead of being 10 or 15%, if it were 50 or 60 or 70%, and then the incentives would be to get things done, because the majority of people have, relatively similar views on most of these issues. It's the far left and the far right, they have different views. But for as long as that kind of majority doesn't bother to vote in a primary, their views don't matter. It's pretty clear they're not going to show up and wait in line and do all the things that it takes to vote under the current system. But if they could just look at their phone, press a few buttons and securely transmit their choices, they would vote. The way we legalized Uber and ride sharing in the United States was that even though the taxi industry at the time was a very powerful cartel, we were able to mobilize our customers from the app to weigh in with their legislators and elected officials to say, we want this thing called ride sharing to exist. And that's how we won in every single jurisdiction across the United States. And I think that's the same thing would be true with mobile voting. We've got to make it much easier for people to vote. We've got to make it secure. And if we do that, we can then start getting the big issues solved in the US. Look, ultimately, you're always going to have people who want power fighting with other people who want power and saying whatever they need to say to try to keep power, right? That was true probably 5,000 years ago. For as long as people have been around, that's been true. But if you have an election where everyone is voting and it's really easy to vote, it's very hard to dispute the results, right? The way that, at least in the US, they allege fraud is they say, oh, the mail-in ballots weren't properly counted, or the people at this polling place were being biased towards one party or the other. All that goes away with mobile voting. With mobile voting, you're just pressing a button on your phones. You really can't have all of the different allegations that currently exist. And also in the US, we have a real problem with voter suppression, where in many states, they don't want the African Americans to vote. And so they come up with various excuses to try to stop them from voting. But they do all that based on seeing someone and seeing the color of their skin. If you're just pressing a button on your phone, no one sees the color of your finger when you're pressing that button. So all of that voter suppression would no longer be possible.
So what's stopping mobile voting from being available worldwide right now?
Yeah, so there are 9 countries around the world that currently allow mobile voting. The country that's done the most with it is not far from Belarus, in Estonia. They have an incredible system where Their entire society is organized over the blockchain. Everyone has a digital identity. Everyone can perform every kind of government service and function on their phone digitally. And their turnout went from 2% to 47% once they instituted mobile voting. So it's up by like 2,500%. So if the US went up 2,500%, that would mean every single person in this country were voting in every single election. So there are clearly good models to do it. There's technology that's already been developed. So we've now actually we're up to elections in 18 different jurisdictions around the US, and they've all gone well. They've all been independently audited by the National Cybersecurity Center, all come back clean. Turnout on average has more than doubled. So we know it works. The next phase is how do we have technology that can accommodate millions and millions of votes online through people's phones. And so my foundation, Tufts Philanthropies, is funding the creation of this new technology. We put $10 million into a program to get incentivize people from the private sector and the nonprofit sector to work on new mobile voting technology. We have what's called an RFP process. 25 different entities applied. We'll pick someone by the end of the year, and then starting early in Q1, they'll start building out the new technology, which we will then make available free to governments all over the world.
Got it. So what are the current flaws?
The current flaw is the potential risk of hacking. So we've done this 18 times now and haven't actually had any hacking, but in theory, it could happen. And so we've got to develop a system that is as secure as possible. And we also have to be able to accept that just like paper ballots and mail-in ballots and voting machines have a certain amount of flaws and risks inherent in them, mobile voting probably will too. But look, paper ballots, for those of you who remember the Bush versus Gore election in 2000 in the US, it was the problems with paper ballots that led to the dispute of the results in Florida, which then led to George W. Bush becoming president, which then led to a war in Iraq that killed 1 million people for pretty much no reason whatsoever. So, paper ballots we know have already killed 1 million people. So I think that as long as mobile voting doesn't do that, we're ahead of the game.
Which conditions should be met in the country for the mobile voting system to be implemented there?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to have a system where you can have a verifiable, audible vote. Blockchain is usually a good way to do it because blockchain is very secure. You want to have end-to-end encryption. And what you want to have is a way to both verify for sure that if Vera is voting, you're you, right? And then second, that your secrecy of ballot is maintained. So they know you're you, but then no one can look and see, oh, did she vote for Trump or Biden or whatever. So those are the conditions that have to happen. We've had all of those conditions met one way or another so far. And the question, at least for us in the US, is can we do it at scale? So the 18 elections we've done so far have been for small populations of people, usually either military stationed abroad or people with disabilities, because if you're deaf or you're blind, voting's even harder. So this is a way to make it easier. But that's, 2,000 votes here, 5,000 votes there. How do we do 2 million votes here, 5 million votes there? So that's the next step.
So my next question looks a little bit further ahead into the future, into the post-pandemic world. Can you name 3 significant changes that we will see in the nearest future?
Yeah, sure. So one is something that we've been investing in out of our fund for a while now, and that's telemedicine. It's an issue that really has catapulted to the front of the line because of COVID. People now all of a sudden need healthcare. They're either quarantined at home or the last place you want to go is a doctor's office where you could potentially catch COVID. So people started getting their healthcare in different forms, over text, over video, and it's working really well because it both brings down the cost of administering healthcare and makes it more available to more people. And so I think that what we will see now is more investment, more technology invested behind it, the government and the insurance companies promoting it even more. So that's a major change. That's number one. Number two is all the things that can kind of lead to working from home. So you and I are talking on Zoom right now. Zoom has, done incredibly well overall during this pandemic. Amazon, quite frankly, because they can just deliver anything you want. And I think delivery drones will become a real thing, in part also because of the pandemic. All the various ways to deliver people, internet and streaming and everything else at their homes, Netflix and Amazon Prime and Hulu and all of those platforms have done incredibly well. So everything that kind of enables you to do stuff at home, whether it's work, entertainment, or sometimes a mix of both. So I think that's the second one. And then the third, I think, is at least in the U.S. Because of the pandemic, the economy was devastated, and governments have no tax revenue, and so I think all kinds of things that weren't allowed by government before, but they can generate money for the government are now going to happen. So, for example, in the US, sports betting on your phone will now be approved. Cannabis legalization will be approved. Some places are legalizing psychedelic drugs, like mushrooms have been approved in a couple of places. Anything that before was being held up by politics, but you have tax revenue you can offer, at least in the US, is now all going to skate through.
Okay, so in general, in your opinion, where does the US stand in terms of innovation? Because we know we have Silicon Valley, but
yeah,
like Estonia.
It's a great question, right? So the answer should be we should be the best at it, because typically we attract the most talented people from all over the world who want to be in the US. And if you can always attract the very top talent, you should be the very best. However, we've had this idiotic policy now for the last 4 years where we've limited immigration, we've limited people who can come in on H-1B visas. So instead of bringing the best from all over the world in, we're rejecting them and saying, go work in Estonia, go work in Belgium, go work in Hong Kong, whatever it is, and we're losing all this talent. So I do think, because we'll have a new presidential administration starting in January, they will restore the old policies, and hopefully it's not too late to attract people to this country again. Because look, we have an incredible education system of higher ed that delivers tons of R&D. We have an incredible venture capital system that can put tons of money into technology. We have a huge consumer system that's willing to buy all kinds of products and services and everything else, but you need the technical talent to put it all together. We still do produce a lot of it in the US, but our ability to really be the top tech country in the world, and the most innovative country in the world, rests on having the best talent in the world. And so I'm really hopeful that we'll start getting that again.
Currently, we have autonomous vehicles, we have traditional services like insurance that run on AI. You've been known as the person who sees the next big things. So what are they now?
That's a great question. Let me tell you some things that at least we're investing in that I think are interesting. Some of them I think are global trends. Some of them are more US-based trends. So one would be digital health, telemedicine, and the ability to bring health care to people online in a far more efficient way. We have investments in pharmaceutical approaches to it, mental health, physical health, addiction recovery, lots of different components. So that's one that we're really excited about. That's number one. Number two, in the US, we have this incredibly aging population, and there needs to be all kinds of goods, products, services. It sounds a little like not cutting edge talk about senior citizens, but the truth is there's going to be a huge industry that has to be developed around them. So senior care is something that we have been looking at pretty closely. Third would be I'm really interested in esports betting. So I do a lot of work kind of in the gaming sector, and I think that esports betting has the potential to swallow all casino gambling, all other gambling completely, because like I think about my son who's 11. He is very happy to watch two people he doesn't know play each other in a game that he likes. And he doesn't really know much about gambling right now, thank God. But when he's 18, he will. And do I think that he'll want to, start putting 50 cents down on whether the guy turns left or right, or $1 on whether they, it's a pass or a run in the next play? I think so. So to us, we've been really looking at platforms where we can develop and grow I'm working on a tele-religion startup right now that I'm incubating. We're looking to have the beta out there early Q2. So I think that could be really interesting and exciting. And then there's still so much more to go in drones, in AI, in machine learning, in cryptocurrency, in blockchain. So that we've scratched the surface on a lot of interesting technologies and industries, but there's so much more we can do.
So what are the new business models and new markets that would be emerging in the post-pandemic world?
Yeah, so one would be, people have gotten used to getting goods and services in a virtual way. So that's whether it's healthcare delivered online or whether it is, all of your entertainment, to the point where you have to question, do movie theaters really need to come back, right? Or has everyone gotten so used to Netflix that, quite frankly, the future is purely streaming and purely at home. Um, Delivery drones, right? So if we're not going to be going out and about as much and ordering more stuff, would you want to have something that could autonomously bring you, whether it's your package, your burrito, or whatever it is? I think all of that is certainly one area. I think lots of things that are right now physical may not come back in the same way, even post-vaccine. So, like, take casinos. I mentioned esports a minute ago. I think that places like Las Vegas will always attract a crowd because it's fun to go there. But at least in the US, you have all these small casinos that have slot machines and some other kinds of gambling. People are going to say, you know what? I can do this from my couch, at home, on my phone, without driving anywhere, without getting in a car, without getting dressed. And that's what they're going to do. And so I think so many different forms of at home entertainment, commerce, services that were already being developed will be so much more expedited because of changes in social norms and behavior because of COVID.
Mm-hmm. Do you think we should expect different forms of relationships between governments?
Yeah, it's a great question. Arguably, the more that government can provide services digitally, the less government you need, right? So I think you could look at it and say, rather than having all these hurdles of municipal government and county government and state government and federal government, if life becomes a lot less analog and a lot more digital, you can wipe a lot of that out. So, in the US, we waste tens of billions of dollars a year, maybe more, on just pure government bureaucracy that doesn't deliver any value to the taxpayers at all. And I think that transforming to a more digital world gives us the ability to eliminate a lot of that. Now, of course, all of the bureaucrats who have power and money are not going to go without a fight, right? They're going to want to keep what they have, so it's not going to happen overnight. But ultimately, there's just a lot of waste in the society that I think in some ways COVID starts to change the way we think about things.
Thank you for taking your time to speak with us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Vera. It's always a pleasure.